Welcome to Corrections Mama 27 channel. So while I was out here working, I was just thinking about a situation that happened in Texas. I was at the Lane Murray unit in Texas in the 90s, late 90s. And I was working at the female unit. Lane Murray at that time was a female unit. And that was my stomping ground, I guess you could say. That was where I learned my first lessons. That was where I cut my teeth in DOC. And it was a scary time for me, but it was also like crazy and like really interesting. So one situation, there's things that you see you can't unsee, okay? So this is one thing that happened that I was appalled at first, but afterward I was like, I thought it was pretty funny. So let me explain a little bit. So in this particular dorm, it was an F dorm, and it was at the end of the walk on the right, and you had to go through some gates. Now, F dorm was a particularly rotten dorm. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. Because we had ADSEG across on the left. ADSEG was the single-celled, two-celled people. Those females in ADSEG were there because they were disciplinary problems. They got in trouble a lot. And so what they would do is they would, when they had them for a certain period of time, and then they would move them to FPOD. So that was their step down from ADSEG, was FPOD. And the further you got to a building closer to admin, the lower custody level you were classified as. So when these girls were reclassified, they did their time in ADSEG. They gave them a step down to FPOD. So these girls are a little wild. These girls were wild and crazy. They were disrespectful. They did all kinds of crazy stuff. You really had to be on your toes in FPOD because these girls are like, out of the gate. They're out of being in a one-man cell into a huge dorm. And this dorm was big. I would say there was probably at least 200 inmates in that dorm. And there was a control room like across the way, but they really didn't have a visual on us. They had cameras. I guess that's a visual, but they couldn't really, there wasn't a bubble where they could actually see me, you know what I mean? And it was 2 stories. There was a day room in the middle. And then on the end of the day rooms, there were 2 stories where you had the bunks. And in the day room, also in the back of the day room was kind of like a half wall, and then they had showers there. So that's kind of what the setup was. And when you would go through there, they had a door at the top at the end of each, where the beds were on the upper and on the lower. I called these Casper doors because it was a double keyed door. There was no knob. So when I tried to go through that door from the other side, they could not tell you were coming. You would just key it and come in. And oftentimes when an officer was on a break or on the other side in the other building where there was another officer on the other side of that wall, we would walk over there and talk to them, or we would do, a walk for them or whatever. And it kind of would like go in like a circle or a square maybe. And so I would do my walk and I would go through that door. I called it the Casper door because you were kind of like the ghosts, like people couldn't see that you were coming. So I was doing a walk up there, and these cells have like a bunk and a metal wall. Between each bunk is a metal wall. The metal walls are half walls and they're bolted to the floor. So they're a little flexible, right? I mean, not real flexible, but if you pushed hard or whatever, you could move them. Move them like they'll wobble a little bit. So I'm walking through the Casper door, and this happened on a fairly regular basis. Usually the lookouts, the inmates that are telling the other inmates that you're coming, they usually would be in tune to you coming through or whatever, but it was a lot harder for them to determine you were coming through that door. So I walked through that Casper door on the upper story, and I walk about 5 cells down, and I'm doing a security check. So I'm looking in the cells. What is everybody doing? You know? Well, I look into the cell, and I didn't see anybody when I was walking up until I got there. And there was an inmate on the floor, laying on her back. Now keep in mind, I think this was swing shift, and when these women, in Texas, they wore white. They wore a white shirt, white pants, and the women had what you call a gown. And the gown was a light gown. It had like short sleeves, and it was just straight down, and it went just below, below their knees. And that was their gown for what they would walk around in at night and maybe sleep in sometimes. So kind of like her pajamas, I guess, or a muumuu, but it was just like all white. It was like made by the prison. That's just what they had. So I look over, and this chick is on the ground laying on her back, and then I see some legs and a body and another person, but they're laying on their stomach, so their feet were down. When you look, you expect their feet to be up, right? Because you can see her face. The shoes on her back. Well, these feet were upside down, and I was just like, "What's going on?" Like, it didn't even register at first. What was happening? Well, what was happening was this inmate was under this chick's gown, having oral sex. So you see one girl, she's got her legs up, I guess, and then another girl on her stomach doing the deed. And it was like shocking at first. Like the first time I saw it, I was like, what the duck is going on? Are you serious right now? So anyway, they cannot do this. They're not supposed to have sex. They cannot consent to sex. There's not a lot that they can actually consent to. That's just the law. So I say, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I take my radio, which is like a heavy kind of brick thing, and I hit that wall to startle them. Because honestly, I was standing there for a good minute trying to figure out what the heck was going on, trying to process what was happening in my brain. And they pretty much didn't, they were just going at it. They had no idea I was even there. So I took my radio and I hit it on that partition wall. And it's metal and bolted to the floor, so it wobbles. And when it wobbles and you hit it like that, it makes a really loud noise. It goes wah 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 wah. And so this thing went wah 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 wah. And oh my God, it scared them girls half to death. They were not expecting this. The sound was very loud, and the one girl goes, because she had her eyes closed, apparently, and just enjoying this thing that they were doing. And she opens her eyes. Her eyes are like saucers. They're like big, and her mouth drops over. She's like, "Oh my God, we're caught!" And then the other girl comes jumping up, and she's like wiping off her mouth and like, "Oh, what?" Like she's about to have a heart attack. And I was just like, "What are you doing? That's disgusting. You're on report." So I put them both on report, told them to give me their IDs, and they're like, I'm sorry, we're so sorry. Oh my God, we didn't even know you were there, and this and that. I said, that's just, That's just disgusting. That's something I really can't unsee. That's horrible. And let me tell you something. In Texas, when you give an inmate a ticket, it meant something. They were upset. They would usually come begging and apologizing and trying to talk you out of writing the ticket, which is your discretion. So, but no, I didn't. I went ahead and went through the ticket and gave it to them. Turned it into administration, and the inmates were apologizing. I'm sorry, and blah 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 blah. Begging. I said, look, just leave me alone, okay? I don't even want to talk about it. I'm gonna put it on paper and turn it in, and that's gonna be the end of that. In Arizona, it's a different story because administrators are crooked. They play late to make a deal with tickets. There's very little consequences for the inmate's behavior unless that administrator has a particular distaste for that inmate. And oftentimes, your ticket don't mean shit. And they just shred your tickets, they throw them away. Sometimes inmates get disciplinary, sometimes they don't, or they slap them on the hand. In Texas, when they lose privileges, it's on, and they're on a LOP, loss of privileges or loss of property. They come in and they seize all the property that for disciplinary, their TV, their radio, their commissary, whatever they've got. They take it and inventory it and put it in storage. I mean, it's no joke. They don't play. And then they put on the count sheet, LOP. So when I'm doing count and I notice, hey, that girl's got a radio and she's on LOP here. What? No, not today. Then I'll just take it. And so whoever loaned it to him is going to lose their shit. So that's kind of how it worked. So inmates really, they really cared about their disciplinary because they would lose good time and they would lose property and they would get disciplined for real. In Arizona, they didn't get disciplined. And if they were on LOP, I never knew about it. We never knew they were on LOP. They would just borrow somebody else's stuff, but we would never be the wiser unless somebody said, hey, property officer would come in and say, these people on LOP, can you make sure they don't have to go get their stuff? Or can you make sure they don't have anything? But that didn't happen hardly ever. Hardly ever. And there was very little disciplinary that really happened, very little consequence. So our tickets really just made us feel better by writing it. This inmate did this and just getting it off our chest. But honestly, in Arizona, the tickets didn't mean shit. All right? It really didn't mean nothing. I have had CO4s and disciplinary officers and all kinds of people to shred the ticket. And all that does is empower the inmate. Then the inmate feels like, yeah, I can do whatever I want. Fuck that bitch. I can do whatever I want. It's crazy. I hated Arizona Department of Corrections about that because it was just so. They gave officers no options and no power and no control or nothing. I mean, basically, we were just eyes and ears and reported, and that's it. And most of the time, a lot of the time, inmates didn't even get disciplined. So, that's the story. That is the story. And, yeah, that's the difference. So, thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe, and push that notification bell. Please make a comment. Keep it nice. And also, I appreciate it if you all ask questions.